There's something happening at night in European marinas that nobody's supposed to talk about. Something that marina operators do under cover of darkness when the tourists are gone and the harbor is quiet. Something that solves a problem they're desperate to solve but can't solve legally. Something that, if you knew it was happening, would fundamentally change how you think about boat abandonment, marina liability, and the desperate measures people take when systems completely break down. I'm going to tell you about sailboats that disappear. Not stolen by thieves looking for profit, not sold to eager buyers, not moved to other locations, disappeared. Sailboats that occupy a slip one week and are gone the next with no record of removal, no documentation, no official acknowledgement that anything happened. And I'm going to tell you why this is happening across Europe, from the Mediterranean to the North Sea, who's doing it, how they're getting away with it, and what it reveals about just how catastrophically broken the marine industry has become. This isn't conspiracy theory or internet rumor. This is documented reality that exists in the grey area between legal process and practical necessity, where marina operators are making choices that could destroy them if exposed, but seem like the only choices available given the nightmare they're facing. What I'm about to reveal is going to shock you, not because it's particularly violent or dramatic, but because it represents such a fundamental breakdown of normal systems that illegal actions start looking rational, even necessary. By the end of this investigation, you're going to know things that marina operators desperately don't want known. You're going to understand the economics and the desperation that drive these actions. You're going to see exactly how easy it is to make a sailboat disappear when you control the marina. And you're going to have to decide what you think about all of this, because there are no clear good guys and bad guys here, just people trapped in an impossible situation, making choices that seemed unthinkable until they became the only option for survival. Stay with me, because this story goes to places you won't expect, and by the time I'm done, you're going to see the abandoned boat crisis in a completely different light. Let me start by setting the context, because you need to understand the scale of the problem European marina operators are facing before you can understand why some of them are resorting to what can only be described as criminal solutions. Marinas across Europe are being overwhelmed by abandoned sailboats, not just a few scattered derelict vessels that can be managed individually. We're talking about dozens of boats in some locations, sometimes representing 20 or 30% of total slip capacity. Sailboats whose owners have simply vanished, stopped paying mooring fees, stopped responding to contact attempts, stopped acknowledging that they own a vessel taking up valuable space. These aren't old wooden hulks that were clearly abandoned decades ago. Many are relatively modern fiberglass sailboats from the 80s, 90s, even early 2000s. They're boats that were sailed actively as recently as 2020 or 2021 that still have personal belongings aboard. That shows signs of having been someone's dream before becoming someone's nightmare. The owners didn't die or move or have some tragic event that explains the abandonment. They just walked away, made a calculated decision that continuing to pay mooring fees and maintenance costs for a boat they weren't using was worse than simply disappearing and letting the marina deal with the problem. For marina operators, these abandoned sailboats represent a crisis that threatens their entire business model. Each abandoned boat occupies a slip that could be generating revenue from a paying customer. Monthly mooring fees in European marinas typically range from 800 to 2,000 euros, depending on boat size and location. An abandoned 40-foot sailboat is therefore costing the marina anywhere from 9,000 to 24,000 euros per year in lost revenue. That's just the opportunity cost. The actual costs are far worse. Abandoned sailboats deteriorate rapidly when nobody maintains them. Sails rot and shred, rigging corrodes, deck hardware fails, hulls develop leaks. Within a year or two, an abandoned sailboat transforms from a potentially salvageable vessel into an environmental hazard that's actively leaking oil, fuel, antifreeze, sewage, and other contaminants into the harbour water. Marina operators are liable for environmental damage occurring at their facilities. If an abandoned boat sinks in place and causes pollution, the marina can face massive fines from environmental authorities. If an abandoned boat breaks loose during a storm and causes damage to other vessels or marina infrastructure, the marina is liable. These aren't theoretical risks. They're real liabilities that keep marina operators awake at night, knowing that any one of their abandoned boats could become a catastrophic expense at any moment. The marina's reputation and aesthetics suffer enormously. Paying customers don't want to moor their boats next to deteriorating derelicts. The presence of abandoned boats signals that the marina isn't well managed, isn't selective about clientele, isn't maintaining standards. Premium customers leave for better facilities. Prospective customers choose competitors. The marina's brand value erodes with every abandoned boat that sits visible and rotting. So marina operators desperately want these abandoned sailboats gone. The problem is that removing abandoned boats legally in Europe is an absolute nightmare, a bureaucratic labyrinth so complex and time-consuming that it effectively doesn't work as a practical solution. The process varies significantly between countries and even between regions within countries, but the general pattern is consistent. First, the marina must document extensive attempts to contact the registered owner. This means sending multiple registered letters to the last known address, which often come back marked as undeliverable because the owner has moved without forwarding information. It means attempting to contact through email addresses that bounce back as inactive. It means trying phone numbers that are disconnected. It means searching public records to find updated contact information. All of this takes time and costs money for administrative staff or legal professionals to execute. Second, once the marina has documented that the owner cannot be located through reasonable efforts, they must initiate formal legal proceedings. This typically requires filing notices with maritime authorities, obtaining court orders to declare the vessel abandoned, and following notification procedures that can take months, even when nobody responds. Legal fees for this process typically range from €5,000 to €15,000, sometimes more if the case is complicated by unclear ownership or jurisdictional questions. Third, even after obtaining legal authority to remove the abandoned boat, the marina discovers there's no market for it. Nobody wants to buy a sailboat that's been sitting neglected for a year or two. The condition has deteriorated to the point where restoration costs exceed any possible value. Salvage yards might take it, but they charge for removal rather than paying for the hulk. The marina ends up having to pay for haul-out, transport and disposal, which for a 40-foot sailboat can easily cost another €5,000 to €10,000. So let's do the complete math on what a single abandoned sailboat costs a European marina if they follow the legal process. Lost mooring fees during the 12 to 18 months the legal process takes, minimum €15,000 and often much more. Legal costs to pursue abandonment proceedings and obtain authority to remove the vessel, €5,000 to €15,000. Haul-out, transport and disposal costs once they finally have legal authority, another €5,000 to €10,000. Administrative time and opportunity costs that can't be precisely quantified but are substantial. Environmental remediation if the boat leaks or causes damage during the waiting period, potentially tens of thousands more. All told, a single abandoned sailboat following the legal removal process costs the marina between €25,000 and €50,000, often more. And when you have 10 abandoned boats, or 15 or 20, the costs become existential. A small to medium-sized marina cannot absorb €300,000 to €500,000 in losses from abandoned boats. It will bankrupt them. It will force them to close, costing jobs for staff and eliminating berthing capacity for legitimate boat owners who need facilities. So marina operators across Europe are facing a stark choice. Follow the legal process and potentially go bankrupt, destroying everything they've built and putting their families and employees at risk. Or find another way, And increasingly, they're finding another way. They're making sailboats disappear. Now, before I tell you exactly how they're doing this, let me be absolutely clear about something. What I'm describing is illegal. It's destruction of property. It's potentially serious environmental crimes. It's fraud in some jurisdictions. I am not advocating for it. I'm not saying it's morally right. I'm not encouraging anyone to do this. I'm telling you it's happening because the situation has become so desperate, the legal system has failed so completely that people who never imagined they'd break the law are choosing to commit crimes rather than face financial ruin by following rules that don't work. This is what happens when systems break down, when legal processes are so slow, expensive, and ineffective that they cease to function as actual solutions. People find illegal alternatives. It's predictable human behavior when institutions fail. So how do you make a sailboat disappear? It turns out to be easier than you'd think if you control the marina, if you have the access and the knowledge and the willingness to cross lines that most people would never consider crossing. The first method, and probably the most common across European marinas, is what I'll call strategic sinking. The mechanics are straightforward, but the execution requires planning. The marina operator waits for the right conditions, typically bad weather or periods of high activity, when there are lots of boats moving around, when attention is divided and nobody's specifically watching any particular vessel. They access the abandoned sailboat, which is trivially easy because it's sitting in their marina and the owner isn't monitoring it, isn't checking on it, isn't anywhere nearby. Most sailboats have multiple through-hull fittings, valves that normally allow water to flow through systems for cooling engines, for sink drains, for head discharge, but can also allow water to flood into the hull if opened improperly. The marina operator, usually late at night or early in the morning, opens these through hulls. They might remove intake hoses. They might open seacocks that should be closed. They might compromise the bilge pump system so it can't keep up with the incoming water. Within hours, water is flooding into the boat faster than it can be pumped out. The sailboat settles lower in the water, then lower still, until finally the deck is awash and the boat sinks at the dock, settling onto the harbor bottom. Now the marina has a sunken boat problem instead of an abandoned boat problem, and this is where the strategy pays off. A sunken boat is an immediate environmental and safety hazard. Authorities don't wait months for legal processes. The Coast Guard or equivalent maritime authority, environmental protection agencies, harbor masters, they all want the sunken boat removed right now, immediately, before it causes pollution or navigational hazards or additional damage. The marina operator reports the sinking, expresses shock and concern, cooperates fully with authorities. In many cases, the marina has insurance that covers sunken vessel removal, or the port authority has emergency response funds specifically for this situation. Or there are government contractors who specialize in sunken vessel recovery and work directly with environmental agencies. The boat gets removed quickly, usually within days or weeks, rather than the months or years that legal abandonment proceedings require. The costs are borne by insurance companies or public emergency funds, not by the marina directly. The slip is freed up and can immediately be offered to a paying customer. And here's the critical detail that makes this strategy work. There's no evidence that the sinking wasn't accidental. Old sailboats sink at docks all the time for completely natural reasons. Through hull fittings fail due to corrosion. Hoses deteriorate and burst. Seacocks crack. Bilge pumps fail. Proving that the marina operator deliberately sank the boat would require investigation resources that nobody has and evidence that doesn't exist. Maritime authorities investigating a sunken derelict sailboat aren't running forensic analysis on through-hull fittings to determine whether they failed naturally or were tampered with. They're focused on removing the hazard and determining who pays for it. As long as the marina plays their role properly, expressing appropriate concern and cooperating with removal, nobody questions whether the sinking was deliberate. It becomes just another old abandoned boat that finally succumbed to neglect and sank Unfortunate but inevitable given the circumstances. The second method used in European marinas, particularly those with direct access to open water, is offshore disposal. This one is riskier in terms of execution, but offers complete elimination of evidence. The marina operator, working late at night when the harbor is quiet, moves the abandoned sailboat out of the marina. They might use a workboat to tow it. They might put a minimal crew aboard and motor it out under its own auxiliary engine if it still runs. They take it several miles offshore to water deep enough that the wreck won't be a navigational hazard or easily discovered. They open every through hull, remove any hoses that would restrict water flow, disable the bilge pumps, and let the boat flood. Within 30 minutes to an hour, the sailboat sinks beneath the surface and disappears into the depths. The boat is gone, completely. No evidence remains at the marina. The operator simply updates their records to show the slip is vacant, available for new customers. If anyone asks, which rarely happens because abandoned boat owners aren't checking on their boats, the marina says the owner came and moved it, or they say it broke loose during weather and was lost, or they simply claim confusion about what happened, that boats come and go and they don't monitor every movement. Without witnesses, without documentation, without any physical evidence, there's no way to prove the marina disposed of the boat illegally. And even if suspicions existed, who would investigate? The owner's long gone and isn't filing complaints. They abandoned the boat precisely because they wanted nothing more to do with it. Local maritime authorities don't have resources to investigate every boat that goes missing from a marina's records, especially when the supposed owner isn't complaining and there's no obvious crime scene. The sailboat just disappears into the Mediterranean or the Atlantic or the North Sea. One more piece of debris on the ocean floor among thousands of wrecks, and everyone moves on. The third method, less dramatic but perhaps more common than people realize, is systematic parting out and disposal. This one takes more time, sometimes weeks or months, but is much harder to prove as illegal and allows the marina to recoup some costs. The marina operator or contractors working for them systematically strip the abandoned sailboat of anything valuable. Electronics get removed and sold to marine salvage dealers. Hardware, winches, cleats, stanchions, all get unbolted and sold. Sails, even deteriorated ones, have some value for patching or as raw material. Rigging, especially stainless steel cable, can be sold as scrap. The auxiliary engine, if it's in reasonable condition, might be worth a few €1,000 to someone doing a repower. Bit by bit, the sailboat is reduced from a complete vessel to a stripped hull. Then the hull itself is dealt with. In some cases, it's cut up with saws and grinders, reduced to manageable pieces that can be disposed of as fiberglass waste or taken to landfills. In other cases, the hull is broken apart and the pieces scattered, some dumped at sea, some buried in remote areas, some mixed in with legitimate construction or demolition waste. This process takes longer than sinking and requires more effort, but it's much harder to prosecute as illegal disposal. The marina can claim they were simply securing loose equipment to prevent environmental hazards. They can say they were maintaining the boat while trying to locate the owner. They can argue they were preventing theft by removing valuable items for safekeeping. By the time anyone might question what happened, the sailboat no longer exists in any identifiable form. There's no hull to forensically examine. There's no evidence trail. There's just an empty slip and vague explanations about the owner finally coming to claim their boat or arrangements being made that the current staff don't have records about. Now you might be thinking that surely someone would notice sailboats disappearing, that other boat owners or marina staff or maritime authorities would catch on and report what's happening. But the reality is that people aren't paying attention in the ways you'd expect. Most marina customers don't closely track which boats are in which slips unless it directly affects them. They notice when a boat near them has been visibly abandoned for months. They might complain about the eyesore, but they don't notice when that boat suddenly isn't there anymore. They assume something official happened, that the owner came and retrieved it, or the marina moved it, or it got sold. Their attention is on their own boats, their own activities. They're not conducting surveillance of the entire marina, watching for irregularities. Marina staff, the ones who would be in the best position to witness what's actually happening, they're not going to report it because their jobs depend on the marina staying in business. If the marina goes bankrupt because of abandoned boat costs, the staff lose their employment. They understand why the operator is doing what they're doing, even if they don't explicitly know the details. Many staff members practice what could be called willful blindness. They show up to work, do their jobs, and don't ask questions about boats that disappear or sink under suspicious circumstances. It's an unspoken understanding that some problems are being solved in ways that can't be officially acknowledged, and the abandoned boat owners themselves, the people who would theoretically have legal standing to complain about their property being destroyed, they've already vanished. They're not monitoring their boats. Many don't even know their boats have been disappeared, and even if they somehow found out, what would they do? They abandoned the boat precisely because they wanted to escape the financial obligations. They owe the marina thousands or tens of thousands of euros in back fees. They have no documentation of the boat's condition before disappearance. They would have to prove the marina deliberately destroyed their property, which is nearly impossible without witnesses or physical evidence. And pursuing such a case would open them up to countersuits for the substantial fees they owe. The legal exposure of complaining far exceeds any possible benefit, so they stay silent, and the disappeared sailboats generate no complaints, no investigations, no attention from authorities who might stop what's happening. It's the perfect crime in the sense that there are no witnesses willing to testify and no victims willing to prosecute. Let me tell you about specific cases, because this isn't theoretical speculation. This is real and happening right now across Europe, and I've talked to people directly involved or who have witnessed these activities. I'm going to be deliberately vague about specific locations and identifying detail because I don't want to expose individuals to criminal prosecution. But these are real stories from real marinas. Case 1 involves a marina on the French Mediterranean coast. They had 14 abandoned sailboats ranging from 35 to 50 feet, representing nearly 20% of their total slip capacity. The legal process to remove them would have taken a minimum of 2 years collectively and cost over 120,000 euros in legal fees alone, not counting disposal costs. Over an 18-month period, 9 of those sailboats sank at the dock during various storms and weather events. Each sinking was reported to maritime authorities. Each was treated as an unfortunate but natural occurrence. Each was removed through emergency response protocols at public expense. The marina operator, speaking off the record to someone I know, admitted flat out that none of those 9 sinkings were accidental. They had carefully chosen which boats to sink based on which would cause the least environmental damage, which were deteriorated enough that sinking would look natural, and which were positioned where sinking wouldn't affect paying customers' boats. They did it systematically. They got away with it completely. And they said without hesitation that they would do it again because the alternative was bankruptcy and the loss of 30 years of work building the marina. Case 2 involves a marina in Greece, one of the countries hardest hit by the abandoned boat crisis because it's a popular destination where cruisers run out of money and simply disappear, leaving their boats behind. This marina had 23 abandoned sailboats at one point, an absolutely devastating concentration of non-revenue generating space. Legal removal wasn't even realistically possible because the costs would have exceeded the marina's entire annual revenue. The marina operator organized what he called cleanup operations. During the off-season, usually during periods when few customers were present, they would take multiple abandoned sailboats out to sea in a single operation and scuttle them in deep water miles offshore. They did this 4 times over a 3-year period, removing approximately 17 boats total. The operator, speaking to a maritime journalist who was investigating the abandoned boat crisis, was remarkably matter-of-fact about it. It was either dispose of the boats illegally or close the marina. There was no third option. The legal system had completely failed to provide any workable solution. Local authorities knew what was happening and deliberately looked the other way because they didn't want to deal with the abandoned boat problem either. It would have become a government expense if they intervened, so they simply pretended not to notice. Everyone benefited from the sailboats disappearing, except perhaps the marine ecosystem where they were dumped. But even that environmental harm was rationalized as less severe than the pollution those deteriorating boats would cause if left to slowly disintegrate in the harbor. Case 3 involves a marina in the Netherlands, a country with typically very strong environmental regulations and rule of law culture, which makes this case particularly significant. They had 11 abandoned sailboats, several of which were in advanced stages of deterioration and actively leaking contaminants. The legal process to remove them was estimated at 18 months minimum. In the interim, the marina faced environmental fines for the pollution the boats were causing, creating a perverse situation where following the legal abandonment process was resulting in penalties for the marina. Over a 1-year period, 6 of the 11 boats sank. Environmental authorities removed them as emergency responses. The marina's pollution problem was solved. A former marina employee later told investigators that at least 3 of those sinkings were deliberate, that staff had been instructed to open through hulls on specific boats during forecast storms so the sinkings would appear natural. The employee didn't report it at the time because they understood the impossible situation the marina was in and didn't want to be responsible for destroying the business and costing colleagues their jobs. They only spoke about it years later when the marina had changed ownership and they no longer worked there. Now let's talk about the ethics of this, because it's genuinely complicated and there are no easy answers that satisfy everyone. On one hand, what's happening is clearly illegal. Marina operators are destroying property that doesn't belong to them. They're committing environmental violations by disposing of boats improperly. They're potentially committing fraud by filing false reports about how boats sank or disappeared. If caught and prosecuted, they would face criminal charges, substantial fines, possibly imprisonment. It's wrong in the objective sense that breaking laws is wrong. But on the other hand, these marina operators are desperate people trapped in an impossible situation they didn't create. They're not villains who enjoy destroying boats or polluting harbors. They're business owners who followed legal processes or tried to follow them and discovered those processes are so broken they effectively don't exist as practical solutions. They're facing financial ruin, the loss of businesses they spent decades building, the loss of their own livelihoods and their employees' jobs, all because of a problem created by boat owners who walked away and a legal system that failed to provide workable remedies. When you're facing bankruptcy versus illegal action, when following the law means destroying everything you've built while breaking the law offers survival, what choice do you make? It's easy to say people should always follow the law regardless of consequences, but that's an easy position to take when you're not the one facing ruin. Is it morally wrong for a marina operator to deliberately sink abandoned boats rather than go bankrupt waiting for legal processes that don't work? I genuinely don't have a clear answer. I know it's illegal, but I'm not certain I can call it immoral. What about the environmental impact? Sinking sailboats in harbors or offshore, deliberately releasing contaminants into marine environments? That's undeniably harmful. But here's the counter-argument that operators make. Those abandoned sailboats are going to sink eventually anyway. They're deteriorating, they're not being maintained, their systems are failing. Sinking is the inevitable outcome whether anyone intervenes or not. At least when the marina deliberately sinks them, they can control timing and method to minimize damage. They can remove fuel and oil first where possible. They can choose locations where environmental impact is reduced. They can sink them during conditions where dispersal of contaminants is maximized, versus letting the boat sink randomly, potentially breaking apart and spreading debris and pollutants over wide areas, potentially sinking during conditions that concentrate pollution. Both outcomes are environmentally bad, but the controlled disposal might actually be less bad than the uncontrolled alternative. It's choosing between bad and worse rather than between good and bad. Let's talk about the systemic failure that's driving all of this, because the real villain in this story isn't desperate marina operators making terrible choices. It's the legal and regulatory system that makes boat abandonment easy and removal nearly impossible. It's the marine industry that created conditions where mass abandonment became inevitable. It's the complete absence of responsibility for end-of-life costs of boats. European maritime law, in most jurisdictions, treats boats as valuable property, requiring extensive protections for owners. The same legal frameworks that protect boat owners from having their property seized unfairly also make it incredibly difficult to remove genuinely abandoned boats. The system assumes that boat owners are responsible people who will maintain their property and pay their bills, and it builds in extensive safeguards against improper seizure. But when owners simply disappear, when they deliberately abandon responsibility, the legal protections that exist for legitimate owners become obstacles preventing resolution of abandoned property. The system has no fast track for obvious abandonment. Even when everyone involved knows the owner is gone and isn't coming back, the legal process requires treating the case as if the owner might be located and might dispute the removal. The boat market collapse that created the abandonment crisis emerged from pandemic-era speculation and the subsequent crash that left thousands of owners underwater financially. Those owners made rational decisions to walk away from depreciating assets they couldn't afford. But the marine industry and legal system had no mechanisms to handle mass abandonment at this scale. Nobody took responsibility for creating systems to manage end-of-life boat disposal. Manufacturers aren't required to contribute to disposal funds. There's no industry-wide insurance or bond requirement to ensure abandonment costs are covered. The burden falls entirely on marinas, who had no role in creating the problem, but are left holding the consequences. Here's what should happen but won't. There should be streamlined legal processes for removing clearly abandoned boats, something that takes weeks rather than years, something that doesn't require tens of thousands in legal fees just to obtain authority to remove a boat everyone agrees is abandoned. There should be public funds, possibly financed by registration fees or industry taxes, to cover removal and disposal costs so the burden doesn't fall entirely on marinas. There should be required bonds or insurance for boat owners, ensuring that if they abandon a boat, funds exist to cover removal costs. There should be manufacturer responsibility programs where companies that built the boats contribute to end-of-life disposal, similar to how electronics manufacturers handle e-waste in many jurisdictions. These solutions exist in other contexts. Automotive recycling systems work reasonably well. Tire disposal programs function. Electronics waste management, while imperfect, is better than nothing. But boats have none of this. Creating these systems would require political will that doesn't exist and industry buy-in that won't materialize because it would cost money. So instead, we have marina operators secretly scuttling abandoned sailboats at night and hoping they don't get caught. That's not a system. That's a symptom of system failure. And it's going to continue until someone with power decides to build something better. Now, if you're a boat owner, what does this mean for you? It means that if you're thinking about abandoning your boat, if you're considering just walking away because you can't afford to maintain it or sell it, understand that your boat is not just going to sit there indefinitely. It's likely going to be disappeared, legally or otherwise. The marina is going to do whatever it takes to reclaim that space, and your boat might end up at the bottom of a harbor or scattered across the ocean floor or cut apart and disposed of as anonymous waste. You might think you can abandon a boat without consequences because you're gone and can't be located. But understand that the property you're abandoning will be destroyed, and while you personally might not face legal consequences, you're contributing to a crisis that's forcing desperate people to commit crime. If you're an owner with a boat in a European marina, this should motivate you to stay current on your fees and maintain regular communication with marina staff, because the line between a temporarily unused boat and an abandoned boat that gets disappeared might be thinner than you think. Marinas are understandably paranoid about abandonment right now. If you stop communicating, stop paying, stop showing up, they're going to assume abandonment, and they might take action faster than you expect or want. Keep your contact information current. Respond to marina communications promptly. Even if you're not actively using your boat, make it clear through regular contact that you're a responsible owner who hasn't abandoned the vessel. And if you're considering buying a boat and keeping it in a European marina, this is yet another data point suggesting the market is fundamentally broken. When end-of-life disposal has become so problematic that illegal scuttling is the practical solution, when systems have failed so completely that crimes seem necessary, that tells you something important about the viability of boat ownership as currently structured. You need to factor these realities into your decision about whether boat ownership makes sense for your situation. The marina operators who are secretly disappearing abandoned sailboats, they're not villains. They're not evil people who enjoy destruction. They're trapped between legal processes that have completely failed and financial pressures that are genuinely existential. They're making choices that seem necessary, even though those choices are illegal and ethically ambiguous. They're getting away with it because the system is so broken that nobody with the power to stop them has sufficient incentive to do so. The authorities who could investigate and prosecute don't want to deal with the abandoned boat problem any more than the marinas do. Taking action against the marinas would just transfer the problem to government agencies that have even less capacity to solve it. So everyone looks the other way, maintains plausible deniability, and pretends the problem is solving itself naturally. The sailboats are disappearing into harbors and oceans and scrapyards. The marinas are surviving barely. The authorities are pretending not to notice, and everyone's hoping that somehow the abandoned boat crisis will resolve itself before the whole shadow economy of illegal disposal becomes so large and obvious that it can't be ignored anymore. That's where we are. That's the reality of European marinas in 2025. Boats are being secretly scuttled and disappeared not because people are malicious, but because systems have failed so catastrophically that desperate people are doing desperate things to survive. Now you know what's happening in those marinas at night when nobody's watching. Now you understand why those abandoned sailboats keep disappearing with no explanation. Now you see how broken the system really is, and what happens when legal processes stop functioning as practical solutions. The question is what you do with this knowledge.